I want to lead you through a new analysis that we've developed at the Dukakis Center, in which we've looked at the whole question of what does it take to be successful at economic development, particularly for working cities, such as the city that Jay was city manager for many years, Chelsea. And so what we're going to do is take a look at that very quickly, and then I want to introduce my dear friend, and then we'll hear from, I think, a speaker who I have always enjoyed listening to the many times I've seen him over the years. So let's take a look at this new analysis that we've done. And the big questions that I wanted to ask are, what factors are most important in promoting economic development at the local level? And the second question is, within that, do municipal leaders have any control at all over what really matters? So this is the question you raise with a city manager or a mayor. What can we do for them? Okay? These questions are particularly important for older industrial cities, like Massachusetts working cities, those that have suffered from deindustrialization, higher unemployment, lower family income, and higher poverty. A number of years ago, the Boston Federal Reserve Bank created the Working Cities Program. I was on sabbatical and I worked with that, and they identified 20 cities, all of which had populations of greater than 30,000, median household income below the median for all cities, and poverty rates above the poverty rate for all cities. And they've been working with those cities, including Chelsea, and I was brought in to work with them and then to kind of analyze some of the data. So the real question is what can help these cities once again become economic engines, improving the well-being of their citizens and providing the tax base for their public services? Okay, here are the cities. They range from Revere and Chelsea, Everett, Lynn, Malden, and Somerville, right near us, down to New Bedford and Fall River, all the way out to Chicopee, Springfield, Holyoke, and Pittsfield. All of these were cities that at one time or another had their glory days. At one point, New Bedford was the richest city in America during the days of the whaling trade. Chelsea was famous for some of its industries, and so forth. Lawrence, of course, was where the textile industry was. Same with Lowell. But they've come on hard times, and the question is, what helps them come back? So, about a decade ago, my late colleague, David Soul, who had headed up the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which I believe our guest speaker was president of for a number of years, he was finishing his PhD here at the age of 54, and after he finished his PhD, I said, how about you'd like to come and work with us? He had been the executive director of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and he came, and one of the first things we started working together on was this issue, since he had been working with 101 towns and cities around Boston, was how can we help these cities do a better job of attracting industry, attracting jobs, helping build the commercial tax base. And the very first thing we did is we went out and we got a hold of one of our friends who heads up a group called NIOP, David Begelfer, and we had him bring together a bunch of the people from his organization, all of whom are location or site specialists. These are people whose job is to work with businesses to help them decide where they might want to place their next facility, manufacturing, a commercial operation, a suburban mall, you name it. We brought them together in a series of focus groups, and we said, with trying to be as candid as possible, what do you really look for when you're looking for a city or town to recommend to one of your clients? And they went through and we started looking at all the different issues they might look at: tax rates, labor quality, housing, amenities, business incentives, and so forth. And out of that, we then put together a detailed questionnaire, and we ended up surveying almost 230 location and site specialists from all over the country, who are either members of that national organization, NIOP, the National Association for Industrial and Office Properties, or a group called Cornet, which is the group that represents in-house location specialists, like a senior vice president at Genzyme who runs around the world looking where to put the next testing lab. And we asked them a set of pointed questions, and out of that we got a pretty good idea from them of what they look at in terms of what they see as the kinds of characteristics of a community that would make them recommend that community to one of their clients. Based on that, we put together an economic development self-assessment tool, a tool for municipal leaders. In fact, Chelsea and Jay were among the first 12 to do that. We've now had 72 communities in Massachusetts completed. In fact, tomorrow morning I'm in Brockton giving the results, and next week we're in Gloucester starting a new EdSat with the mayor there, and in Braintree. And we've done it in about 30 cities and towns outside of Massachusetts, the latest being New Britain, Connecticut, again, an older industrial city that we'll be doing. So we did that, and over what we did with it is we have 220 questions in the survey instrument that these municipal leaders fill out, and they cover all of these things: access to customers' markets, how close are you to a limited entry interstate, how close are you to a major airport, concentration of businesses, how many other businesses you have, legal businesses, accounting businesses, or agglomeration businesses like we have the life sciences in Kendall Square, or we have plastics in Leominster. We looked at lease and rental rates. How much does it cost to lease a building? We looked at labor quality by looking at education of the workforce and labor cost, wages and so forth. We looked at a lot of things having to do with the municipal process. How long does it take to get a zoning variance? How long does it take to get a building inspector? Do you make it easy for companies to come in and present their plans to a single board rather than 12 different boards? We looked at the quality of life of the community. What kind of amenities do you have? Restaurants, art museums, sports teams. We looked at the quality of life of the individual development sites. Do you have restaurants, daycare facilities, and so forth? Business incentives. Do you offer any at the local level or the state level? The tax rates of the community. And finally, what do you do about marketing your community, changing people's minds about how they think about your community, be it Chelsea or Detroit, Michigan, where I grew up, or you name it. Over that time, over the last 9 years, we've collected a ton of data on these cities. And the way we now do it is a little different than when Jay first did it, when the secretary first did it as city manager, and that is we still have the municipality fill out this form, but then we hold a public gathering with civic leaders, leaders from the Municipal Chamber of Commerce or the Regional Chamber of Commerce, civic leaders of all kinds, who come together. You'll have the police superintendent, the school superintendent, you'll have maybe 30, 40 people in the room. First time we did this was with Judy Kennedy in Lynn, Massachusetts, and with Tommy McGee, who came, the state senator. And we had them go through the results of what the town manager or city managers had put together, and then question them. What do you mean, Mr. Mayor or Miss Mayor, that you can get a zoning variance in 4 weeks? Took me 9 months. And then we we took their information into account. And then finally we prepare a major report, all color-coded, red, yellow, and green. Red if you're not doing so well, yellow if you're okay, green if you're doing much better. And the way that works is we have a phenomenally sophisticated computer program here on a secure server here at Northeastern, which takes all the data for any one city or town and compares it with all the others. Because we want to know not how you're doing absolutely, but of course how are you doing relative to the competition. And then we go back, as I will tomorrow morning, and report on those results as I will with Brockton tomorrow. Well, this gave us a massive amount of data. And for the most part, this is information that the city or town can use, because we'll come in and say, here's your strengths, here are your weaknesses, here's some real opportunities, here's some threats you should worry about. In some cases, they just don't have enough water. In other cases, their timeliness of approvals are way out of whack. But given all this data, when I was at the Boston Fed last year working with the Working Cities Project, I thought, well, how could we use this data to empirically test what really works? And so what I did is I got data on employment from our own Department of Labor here in the state. These data come from the unemployment insurance input. number of employees by every establishment. And I first of all looked at the 20 working cities, and I asked the question, for the period before the Great Recession, 2001 to 2007, how much growth was there in their employment, right? The percentage change in employment. And between 01 and 07, and we had no idea what the results would be, the city of Revere actually had a large growth of about 9.8%. Taunton was 8.8. Brockton was 6.8. New Bedford was 3.6. At the other end, poor Malden had lost 14% of its workforce. And much of that came because of a major closing of a hospital. Chelsea was in the middle of the pack, a loss of about 4.5% of its job base between 01 and 07, continuing to kind of face troubled times. And then we looked at what happened after 2007, during the Great Recession and after, and it turns out that there were some very strong employment records in cities which had not done particularly well before. And of all of them, the city that broke all records was the city that Jay was. 16% growth. Second was Lawrence. Who would have thought Lawrence would be the second? Haverhill was third, then Somerville. Poor Malden was at the bottom again. And then I said, okay, let's put them all together. Oh no, before I did that, I said, let's talk about leaders and laggers. So here are communities that were losing jobs 01 to 07, but gaining jobs afterward. These are what I call the resurgent cities. And they were Haverhill, look at Chelsea, that's the second bars to the left. Look at Lawrence, Salem, Somerville, Lowell, and Lynn. These are cities coming back, okay? Then we had some gain-loss cities. They were Revere, Taunton, and New Bedford. They'd done well earlier, not doing so well now. And then, unfortunately, we had a whole bunch of cities that were loss cities. They had lost jobs early and continue to lose. And then there's poor Malden at the bottom, okay? So I said, let's put these all together and look at the whole period, 2001 to 2013. Who leads? Jay, time to get up again. Chelsea, with a 10.8% growth over 01 to 013. And let me tell you how great that is. Massachusetts as a whole, during that period, had employment growth of less than 1%. We lost a tremendous amount of jobs, and then in the second term of Governor Patrick, jobs came back real fast. But no one did better than Chelsea, followed by Haverhill, Lawrence, Brockton, and Somerville. Now, from the point of view of a pure academic, I thought you'd like this. From the point, what?
Go on.
Go on. It gets better, Jay. Watch. From the point of view of a pure academic, this is a great chart. And the reason why it's a great chart is there's lots of what we call variance. Some of these are going way up, like Chelsea and Haverhill. Some are coming way down. And you would ask the simple question, why? What correlates with this tremendous difference from a 10.8% growth in employment over those 13 years to a loss of 27%, and everything in between, okay? So what did I do? This is some of the research I love doing. I took this data and I made it what I call the dependent variable. That is, I'm trying to explain the percentage change in employment between 2001 and 2013. What explains it? And what do I have for potential explanatory variables? All the variables I had from EdSat. Because 19 of the 20 cities, all but Fall River, which is doing it next year, had completed EdSat, so I knew their data. So think about, here's my dependent variable. How well did you do in employment as my measure of economic development? And then I have a mess of variables. And what I want to know is, very simply, which ones most correlate with success? Which of all these variables? And I had a lot of them. I had 26 variables that I formed out of the 202 individual questions. Ones that had to do with highway access, parking availability, traffic congestion, infrastructure limitations like lack of water or lack of natural gas or lack of high-speed internet, commercial and industrial rents, What's the triple net cost of leasing a building along your downtown or in your along the highway? What are the labor force skills in your community? Timeliness of approvals. How quick can you get approval for putting up a new development or renovating an old building? Are you near public transit? What's the physical attractiveness of the municipality? Do firms like to come to really attractive communities where there isn't a lot of boarded up property? Complementary business services, legal services, accounting services. Critical mass of firms. Do you have a lot of firms in one industry like plastics? Cross-marketing. Does the municipality actually work with the business community, let's say the Chamber of Commerce, to market that community, right? Marketing follow-up. Does the municipality go out and ask firms that have located, why did you come here? Or even better yet, for firms that decided not to come there, ask why didn't you? Quality of available development parcels. Do you have to do a lot of brownfield remediation? Labor cost. Do you have a formal economic development strategy in your community? Are there available development sites? You need those. Predictable permitting. Is there a process by which a developer knows they're going to be able to go through a process and it's predictable and there aren't going to be a lot of curveballs thrown at them? Fast track permitting. Are there certain areas of the city or town where you can move quickly to put something up? Do citizens pose a problem? Do abutters keep, put up barriers to new development? Do you have a lot of cultural and recreational amenities? What are your crime rates, your housing costs? How good are your schools? Do you have a lot of amenities nearby? And finally, what's the local tax rate environment? That's a lot of variables. And they're all the kinds of things that we were told by those site and location specialists might matter. Although some of them told us some of these were a lot more important than others. Okay, so what matters? So we do a simple correlation and we ask the question of all of these factors, which factors correlated the most with rapid employment growth? Number one was not surprising. You got to have some places to put places up. So Lawrence does very well because they've been able to convert a lot of their old mills to places where development can go. The second was site amenities. Do you have site amenities that employees and customers would want to have? Restaurants, daycare, and so forth. The third surprised us. It was economic development marketing. To what extent, how does your town or city do in terms of marketing that community? And what we heard over and over again from those location specialists is they carry around in their heads what they call cognitive maps. So, as I think I've said in this class before, if I say Detroit, you probably have a cognitive map of what Detroit is like, and maybe you've never visited there, right? Well, part of the problem is that we have cognitive maps of communities, right? Chelsea, if you lived here for 100 years, had one of the worst city fires of all history in, I think, 1906?
1908.
1908, and then they burned it down again in 1973.
There was still some buildings left from the 1908 fire.
Right. So that was the cognitive map that people had of Chelsea, right? And the rag trade. So it turns out, changing cognitive maps turns out to be very important. And in a little while, you're going to find out why Jay Ash has been so successful at economic development. The fourth was timeliness of approvals. Really matters. And what we found out is that if you think about it, in this new global economy, the companies that really do well are the ones who get into the market first. If you get into the market second, third, or fourth, you've lost it. And the best example I love using in all my talks before communities, I pull out my iPhone. This is an iPhone 5. I'm way behind, right? I don't have an iPhone 6 yet. But you think about competitors of the iPhone, and you have one that was called BlackBerry, right? How many of you still have a BlackBerry, right? That was the best-selling smartphone on the, but they didn't come up with a touchscreen until later. And that, and now we've got Samsung Galaxy comes out a few weeks after, and then Apple will come out with its new product, etc. That's not only true of phones, it's true of almost every business. Getting there first. So anything that slows you down, getting into the ground, up and working, hiring your workforce, and getting product or service out the door is going to hurt. Parking's important. You have to have on-site parking. And it turned out for these older industrial cities, these are the 20 working cities, Better schools actually matter in that community. Okay? What were some of the control variables I used? I wanted to know, does it matter that you're close to Boston? It turns out a little. Being a little closer to Boston, which gets you closer to Logan Airport, gets you closer to downtown Boston and the amenities there. I asked, how about poverty rates? And I expected that high poverty rates would be places people don't want to go. Nope. High poverty, if anything, was positively correlated. And part of the reason is lower cost land. You've got a lot of workers that are available. And then we asked, well, what about cities that had large manufacturing base? And it turned out that in early days, large manufacturing base, that's where you got deindustrialized. That's where cities were losing jobs like crazy. Today, however, there's a weak positive correlation. Those communities with manufacturing bases are actually coming back a little faster than those without them. Lawrence and so forth. Okay? What was really interesting, and I don't have a perfect answer for that, is what factors weren't correlated. Well, one was I expected that you needed lots of law firms and accounting firms. Very weak positive correlation, suggesting not very important. And when we went out and we asked people, they said, look, we can get law firms. We can go to Boston for law. We can get accountants. We don't need them there, and most of it we do electronically anyway. Low crime rate I thought was going to be really important. Nope. No relationship between crime rates. I thought public transit would be important. Again, not very important. Highway access I thought would be real important. It turns out most of these cities have reasonably good highway access. I thought that rents would be really important. Variation in rents don't matter that much. I thought cultural and recreational amenities would really be important. Not very important. I thought tax rates would really be important. If anything, they're negatively correlated. And I scratched my head, why would communities with somewhat higher tax rates attract more business and jobs? And when I went out, they said, well, the reason is first of all, tax rates aren't a very important factor for most businesses. We don't worry about local tax rates. Corporation income taxes, maybe, at the federal level. But they said what is generally true is towns and cities with a higher tax rate also have better services. And we like services. So that's the only way I can explain that amazingly strange result. And then the physical attractiveness of the city is measured by boarded up properties and stuff like that. Turns out good economic development marketing can overcome that. Finally, we decided to say, okay, let's take a look not only at the older industrial cities. At that time, we'd already completed 50 Massachusetts cities. And I said, let's do all of them and look at the number of establishments, the percentage change in the number of establishments. And what turned out to be important? Number one was economic development marketing. Number two was timeliness of approvals. Number three was on-site parking. Number four was public transit. Number five was cross-marketing. Again, that's marketing between the business community and the public sector. Low traffic congestion turned out to be important, somewhat important. Fast-track permitting, having areas of the city where you could get your permitting through real quickly, and site availability. Economic development marketing, timeliness of approvals were number one and number two. Okay? So, what do I conclude from all of this? I find these results very encouraging. You know, if it were crime rates, distance from Boston, physical attractiveness of the city, it's real hard to change the physical attractiveness of a place like Detroit or Holyoke. It's a long-term process to bring crime rates down, and there's not a damn thing a city manager or a mayor can do about getting 1 inch closer to Boston. You are where you are. But the measures that seem to be really important, providing economic development sites, economic development marketing, the speed of the municipal process, finding ways of producing on-site parking, these are the factors that really matter. And the beauty of it is these are factors that municipal leaders actually have some control over. Which means that if you understand these EDSAT results and you work with the Working Cities Project, local government officials working with their business communities and their civic leaders can actually turn their cities around. Thank you. Now, the reason I wanted to do that is no one has been more successful at doing that than our speaker tonight, my dear friend, Secretary Jay Ash. A brief introduction. Jay was born in Chelsea. Father was a truck driver, right? Mother was a homemaker. Graduated from Chelsea High. Was a superstar basketball player. As you'll see when he stands up, he's 2.5 feet taller than I am. Attended Clark University in Worcester. He was also the captain of the basketball team. What was your record in your senior year? Never mind. Well, you can't remember.
21-2.
21-2. That's almost as good as Kentucky.
Almost.
That's good. And he graduated from Clark in 1983 with a bachelor's degree in government. He began his career in government as an aide to State Representative Richie Vogt. And from 1991 to 1996, he served as Vogt's staff director. Then he accepted an offer, I think in 1996, you may not remember this, to become Chelsea's executive director of planning. And then, and during that period of time, there were 16 new economic development projects in Chelsea, including the construction of a $17 million luxury hotel, and built 7 new public schools and several new parks. And then in 2000, the city of Chelsea made Jay Ash their city manager, and he was city manager for 14 years. And during that time, there was all kinds of new development, as our numbers show, including the construction of Market Basket's flagship supermarket, my favorite supermarket these days. He was instrumental in bringing an FBI headquarters to your own city, what everyone wants. New office space, several new hotels, 2,000 new housing units, and several apartment buildings. And as a result, Chelsea now has an influx of new residents, young, immigrants coming here. And as city manager, Secretary Ash also was able to bring the Silver Line to Chelsea. I'm also proud to say that he has been one of the most important pro-immigration civic leaders in our state, working even in marching with immigrant groups. Chelsea has always been a city of immigrants, including a lot of Jewish immigrants in the 19th century and early 20th century. People like, not my grandfather, but friends of my grandfather lived there. And then he became the first secretary in the new Baker administration, the first one appointed. And he has now completely changed the state in the first 8 weeks of being Secretary of the Commonwealth. My dear friend and our Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, Jay Ash.
Growing up in Chelsea, it was a tremendous privilege because everybody was from someplace else. There was a mismatch of races and cultures. There was poverty and wealth. There was really the beginning of what we now see around all of America. I would argue that Chelsea was the melting pot of America before America became a melting pot. And so I grew up with a great deal of richness. I'm going to talk about some of the things that Barry talked about and then get to maybe some of the things I wanted to talk about. So first of all, who's been to Market Basket in Chelsea? So Barry's favorite store. So I am the Economic Development Director in Chelsea for all of 1 month. Anyone have a development background here? Raise your hand if you have a development background here. You notice I didn't raise my hand. Because in 1996, I had no background whatsoever in development. I had worked for the local state representative and had been influential in a number of things that were happening in the community. I had developed a relationship with the new city manager, and he was looking for leadership in the department and somebody who was connected politically to Boston, which I was. So a month into the job, a gentleman calls again from New York, and he's going to come up to Chelsea, and he's going to tell us how he is going to resurrect the Mystic Mall. Now, at that time in 1996, the Mystic Mall was a terrible location. Many stores were boarded up. What stores still left were mom and pop stores. The distinction that the Mystic Mall had in 1996 is it had the most lucrative lottery store in the entire Commonwealth. The most scratch tickets and bets on the big numbers were out of there. So, needless to say, this was a point of contention for the people of Chelsea. And so 1 month into my job with no economic development experience, I have the owner of the property coming up from New York to tell me how he's going to resurrect the vitality of the mall. I thought to myself, this is easy. So, if you can picture a movie, Mr. Samuels comes up from New York, right out of Central Casting, wrong side of 65, gray pinstripe suit, a little bit paunched stomach. And Mr. Samuels comes into my office and he says, son, right out of Central Casting, son, let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to turn the Mystic Mall into a self-storage facility. Mr. Samuels, 25 acres in the middle of Chelsea. How is turning the Mystic Mall into a self-storage facility going to promote the vitality of Chelsea? And his answer was, son, nothing is ever going to come here. At least with the investment we will make, we will take a major eyesore away. So, although I had no development experience, I had some common sense. And common sense said that if we're going to build our economy on self-storage facilities, Chelsea is going to have a lot of problems. So I thanked Mr. Samuels, and he left. By the way, as a side note, in my 18 years in Chelsea, we had many self-storage facility proposals, never built one of them. Every time I drive by a self-storage facility, I think about a defeatist economic development activity on a parcel. Mr. Samuels left. About 8 months later, we lost the property. What he was doing at the time was one last Hail Mary to hold on to the property. He lost the property. To make a long story short, the Mullahs family bought the property because there was a market basket on the site. And the rest, as they say, is history. Mr. Aditi, who was famous this summer, came to Chelsea and wanted to redevelop his 65,000 square foot market basket, which was already doing record numbers, into a megastore. And we worked with him to make that happen. And as a result, he built a 130,000 square foot market basket, which employs over 1,000 people and takes in some ungodly number. We should, all of us should be lucky to have just one day's receipts from the market basket. So the point of that story is severalfold. One, in the development world, saying no is as important as saying yes, and especially when you have a bad reputation. So, talking about reputation for a minute, reputation is an impediment to good economic development. So, as Barry noted, some of you chuckled a little bit, Chelsea did have a reputation at one time. So my first real economic development deal, it's funny, all these stories center around New York. I didn't realize this until today. Doing a company out of New York is come to town. They're building a 70,000 square foot retail location. And the gentleman comes up from New York, and he's there to square away everything before they start development. So he says to me, Jay, is my permits all set? And I said, yes, sir. I'm the zoning board chairman in addition to being the planning board. In addition to being the planning director, and I've taken care of all your zoning permits. And he said, is my tax relief all set? And I said, yes, I also am in charge of negotiating tax relief, and the city council has approved your tax relief. And he said, are my licenses all set? And I said, well, it just so happens that the licensing people report to me, and yes, you are all set. And after those three questions, he asked me one other question, and it goes to the reputation that Chelsea had. He said, what else do I need to do? And he winked. He winked. The reputation of Chelsea was, in order to get your zoning, in order to get your tax relief, in order to get your permits and your licenses, you had to pay somebody off. Now, having grown up in Chelsea, I laughed about that because I knew the reputation. But it was an important point for me in terms of my return to Chelsea to do good work in Chelsea, that we were never going to outlive the reputation. And so I was always fond of saying about Chelsea that, and we remain today, we're recovering alcoholics who can't even be caught in a bar, let alone drinking, because people will go right to the floor and say that, oh, there goes Chelsea again. And so I learned that lesson pretty quickly about the importance of development and the importance of marketing is that how you act oftentimes is the way that people perceive you. So during my period of being the planning director and the city manager, I said no to, probably a dozen self-storage facilities. I said no to Building 19. I said no to drive-through restaurants on the beginning of at the entrances to our town. I said no to heavy construction yards. I said no to trash transfer stations. I said no to things that were going to perpetuate the reputation that people thought about Chelsea. And it was tough sometimes to say no because there is an instinct that you have about wanting to get something done and wanting to bring tax revenues. But the best thing you can do is say no because there's an opportunity cost every time you make the wrong decision. The opportunity cost of not having that parcel available to do something bigger and better, and the opportunity cost in terms of perpetuating an image which causes people not to come forward and propose better development. So I wanted to talk a little bit, I'm going to mix some of this in, some of that in as we go along. So wanted to talk a little bit about what has happened in communities like Chelsea around Massachusetts and around the country, and what I think is the outlook for cities and towns going forward. And that's especially important in my new position in government, and I'll talk a little bit about my relationship with the new governor. Barry was kind to introduce me and talk about some of the involvement that I've had. One of the opportunities I had as Chelsea City Manager was to spend a lot of time outside of Chelsea working with other gateway cities. So all the cities that Barry talked about up on the screen, I had visited as City Manager to talk about what we were doing and to learn from others. And what I've seen in other communities is similar to what I've seen in Chelsea in terms of what caused, first of all, the problems that cities faced, and what I have since seen is that some cities are better than others in overcoming those problems. So first thing to think about is what made cities great at one time. And I would argue that what made cities great wasn't the residential aspects of the city, it was the commercial aspects of the city. Right? Cities were places where wealth was being created. Right? You had industrialists who were building big plants, and those big plants were hiring thousands of people. And those thousands of people were then able to contribute to the economy of their communities. So my day today started off in Ludlow. I went out to Ludlow Mills. Ludlow Mills is a 170-acre parcel on the Chicopee River that was an important manufacturing center for 150 years. At Ludlow Mills at one time, twine was made. And Ludlow was the leading producer of twine in the country, if not the world. Twine was, the raw material was imported from India, brought to Ludlow, was turned into twine and sent out. Some of you are laughing, some of you may not even know what twine is. Some of you are laughing about twine, but you think about before tape, how did people hold things together? When Barry grew up and he had to mail things to his grandmother, he would have to take twine and wrap it around the package. And so the federal government was actually the Ludlow's largest purchaser using twine in the Postal Service and other things. Barry's laughing. Are you laughing because you're remembering those days, Barry? Or you're, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what I learned today in Ludlow is really poignant for this discussion here because Ludlow is not unlike most other cities and towns in places that the Industrial Revolution took hold. A entrepreneur came in and started up a business that grew and grew and grew and became an industrialist, and the industrialist then became the benefactor of the community. So this twine company, you think about the money that was in twine, this twine company built neighborhoods for the 5,000 people that worked in those factories. Those neighborhoods required schools. The industrialists built the schools. The people, 5,000 of them, needed health care. They built hospitals. They built parks. They built social clubs. They built YMCAs. That was a time where great cities were being built based upon the wealth that was being created in those cities, and the industrialists giving back to those cities, in part out of charity, and in part out of it was good business. And so you fast forward now beyond the Industrial Revolution to somewhere after World War II, and you start to see the decline of the United States cities. And I believe the decline of the United States cities is a direct correlation to the things that cities were doing and creating. I mean, if you think about the industrialization of cities, perhaps one of the most important, no, I shouldn't say perhaps, one of the most important inventions that we capitalized on was the car, and yet the car was the thing that allowed for the decline of the cities to happen. So there's irony in the Industrial Revolution in many ways, and one of them is that we became so successful at what we were doing that we were able to use the success to move beyond the places that we were creating the success. The cars were allowing us to suburbanize, and when we suburbanized, we were dragging the wealth out of communities. The wealth was not only people, but it was the businesses who were looking for places where they could sprawl, both people and businesses. And so the loss of that wealth, the loss of the commercialization of cities and towns, some towns created this gap, this void. And unfortunately, in the 50s and then into the 60s and 70s and beyond, what was filling that void was not the best of things. So, you fast forward to today and you see cities that are down on their luck. You mentioned Holyoke. I was out at Holyoke today as well. So first I visited Ludlow, and then I spent 4 hours in Holyoke talking about their innovation district that they're creating in Holyoke. What amazed me about Holyoke was an urban renewal district in Holyoke of 700 acres in their downtown, and each building looking worse than the one that you just looked before that. And you could sense the vitality that once took place in these buildings. They're big, hulking brick buildings, and you could see where the workers would go to eat and shop, and these department stores that are now vacant. And you say to yourself, what is ever going to bring these places back? And so the Holyokes of the world and the Chelseas of the world lost the manufacturing base, lost the wealth that was being created, and in its place, in addition to losing that, what was left behind has created impediments to the redevelopment of those properties as well. So one of the first major projects I did in Chelsea was involved the parking lot, which was actually a great deal. Parking lot paying an awful lot of money into the city for taxes and not sending any kids to school, not having any patrons going to the library, not requiring any services. It was a pure revenue play to build this parking lot. And so as the developer is out there, as this contractor is out there building the parking lot, he's digging into the ground. And for those of you who remember the beginning of the Beverly Hillbillies, this ground used to hold storage tanks, oil storage tanks. And what I'm told from back in the day would be that Barry and Jay would show up for work in the morning, and the first thing we'd have to do is let the condensation out of the pipes before the water contaminated the oil that was going in the trucks that were moving on. So Barry would turn open the spigot to allow for some drainage, and then Jay would ask Barry a question about the Red Sox or something else, and they'd forget, and the next thing you know, 20 gallons or 50 gallons or 100 gallons had spilled out. Well, 20 or 50 or 100 gallons day after day, week after week, year after year, decade after decade, turned Chelsea into the Middle East. The oil in the ground was so prevalent that substantial remediation needed to take place. So the wealth went out and the contamination stayed. And so you think about impediments to development that exist in cities and towns today, and the brownfields, what's left behind from the Industrial Revolution, is a major impediment. In addition to those brownfields, you think about the Holyoke story I just told, there's a negative asset on these lands. It's old buildings. Old buildings that in many cases can't be redeveloped, that have asbestos in them or other bad things that need to be remediated, and need hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to take down. When you spend $1 million to take down a piece of property, that property better be worth $1.1 million, or else you've already lost money on your development deal. So you think about impediments like that. The infrastructure that once supported the great wealth of communities has become poor and crumbling, and you have communities that are incapable of investing in themselves because of the loss of wealth, so their tax revenues are hurt, they can't invest in their self, and it becomes a negative cycle. The old places, the old cities, the fossilization of old cities is a major challenge. So, Patriots fans here, remember when the Patriots were talking about going to Hartford? Well, Jay Ash was coming to the rescue. Jay Ash was going to keep the New England Patriots in Massachusetts by attracting the New England Patriots to a site in Chelsea. So I used my connections to get in to see Robert Kraft. And I brought in my aerial of the Chelsea Everett site that I wanted to talk to Mr. Kraft about. And Mr. Kraft was kind enough to listen to me, and I said, Mr. Kraft, I have a solution that will keep the New England Patriots in Greater Boston. I have a site that has great access to public transportation. I have a site that has great access to the regional metropolitan highway system. I have a site that is in the middle of where all of the people of Massachusetts live, Greater Boston, the most dense area of Massachusetts. I would like to bring you to this site. And he looked at it and he said, how big is that site? And I said, 60 acres. And this is where I was so impressed with Robert Kraft, and I tell him this story all the time, and he laughs about it. And he said, how many parcels are in these 60 acres? And I said, there's about 60 parcels. And he said, how many owners are there of those 60 parcels? And I said, about 45. And he said to me, call me when you get the land assembled. And that was code for, are you crazy? You know how long it would take me to assemble these parcels, to put them together to create a development site? Well, in suburbia, I don't advocate for this, but in suburbia, what do? You find a farm, you find a forest, you find a pasture, and it's one owner, and it's hundreds of acres, and it's about subdivisions. In what's left behind for many of our cities and towns, like what I saw in Holyoke today, is 700 acres. God only knows how many owners there are of those 700 acres. So now to fast forward the other way, I learned that was a valuable lesson to me in terms of my economic development education. Some years later, Barry talked about the FBI regional headquarters is coming to Chelsea. Now, the FBI coming to Chelsea wasn't always good news, if you know what I mean. So I went to the GSA and I said, I have a site that I would like to talk to you about to bring you to Chelsea. And they said, well, we're thinking about Boston, but we'll listen to something else. And so I showed them a site in our urban renewal district of 5 acres. And sure enough, they came, they saw, they liked, and they acquired the property, and they're building the FBI regional headquarters. 500 FBI agents. Public safety, the perception of public safety in Chelsea is really bad. It's going to be interesting to see who moves into Chelsea as a result of the FBI being around and who moves out, right? And people are going to be driving by this 9-story government building that is going to change the perception of Chelsea forever. It's right up against Route 1, our major exposure to the traveling public. And for decades, people are going to identify Chelsea as the place where the FBI is, and they're going to associate safety with the FBI. So when I went to the GSA, I have to tell you, I was thinking about the time that I went to see Bob Kraft. Because when I went to the GSA, I was going with a site that I had assembled that had 4 different parcels with 3 different owners. And I had cleaned up with all the contamination that was left from the Industrial Revolution. And I had already pre-permitted. Now, if I had gone to the GSA and said, I have a great idea for a site, but it's going to take me 2 years to acquire the parcels, 2 years to clean up the parcels, and 2 years to get the permits done, there is no way in the world that would have happened. So the parcelization that exists in cities right now creates problems. It's an impediment to development, and figuring out how to assemble parcels are an important thing. Zoning is an impediment. People hold on to zoning like it's black and white. Like, if you don't pay attention to exactly what we say, you're going to create something that is going to disrupt life as we know it for the rest of our lifetimes. So think about this for a minute. Anyone done any zoning work in Boston? Any development work in Boston? All right. So you're proposing to build a building, and you're 16 inches off of where the building line was supposed to be. You're 16 inches closer to the curb than you were supposed to be. What does Boston tell you to do about the foundation? Move it back, right? Tear it up. We don't want to hear anything, tear it up, right? Does 16 inches really make a difference? So I had this situation with the first hotel coming to Chelsea was amazing, and just an amazing groundbreaking. So, up until 1998, I think, when it broke ground. Up until 1998, the only hotel in Chelsea, you rented by the hour, not by the night. And people would say, how could you be so close to Boston, all the tourism that goes on in Boston, and yet you can't get a hotel to locate in Chelsea? And so this was a real proud moment for us that we were able to finally attract a major hotel, the Wyndham Hotel, to Chelsea. And so I say it was a proud moment because on the day of the groundbreaking, we had 200 people in pouring, driving rain. And there was one woman there, literally, who was crying. She felt like a huge burden had been taken off of her because finally a development company was willing to come to Chelsea and build something that everybody said wasn't possible for Chelsea. So as the foundation is being poured in, I'm getting excited. I'm driving by as a proud papa and driving by and watching the foundation. But then I started to say, geez, this looks awful close to the sidewalk. But what do I know? I've never read plans before. I've never developed anything. I'm the facilitator of development. So after about 3 weeks of doing this, I called the inspectional services people, and sure enough, they had been building off of the previous set of plans and not the right set of plans. It's hard for me to believe that it happened, but it happened. And so we had a dilemma. Our zoning board said, you're going to be 16 further inches off, so you're going to be, instead of 18 inches, you're going to be 3 feet off of the sidewalk. What do we do? And I said to the zoning people, I said, does it really matter that much? And that decision to not make them tear up the foundation, but instead convince them to spend more money on landscaping elsewhere in the parcel, established another reputation for Chelsea being an easy place to do development. And so to talk about zoning a little bit more and why I tell my peers in cities and towns to lighten up on the zoning, the first hotel was the Wyndham Hotel. There are 5 others right now in tiny 1.8 square mile Chelsea that are either open, under construction, or about to begin construction. So we'll have 6 hotels in Chelsea by this time, 2017. Those 6 hotels, by the way, each one of them, $500,000 a year in income between sales tax and room excise tax and property tax. They don't send kids to school. They don't send kids to they don't have patrons going to the library and the like. So one hotel, the Wyndham, allows me to talk to other hotel groups, and the other 5 hotels are all being developed by the same development team. So after the 3rd one goes up, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself, and I'm confident that things are going well, I approached the lead developer and I said, Chris, I got to ask you a question. Why are you developing 5 hotels in Chelsea? And she laughed, and I said, well, it seems to me that you're putting all your eggs in one basket. And she said, Jay, I know you well enough to be able to tell you the truth. And the truth is, we're not building 5 hotels in Chelsea. We're building 5 hotels in Greater Boston, and they just happen to be located in Chelsea. The market that she was after was Greater Boston, and she could have very easily been in Malden, Everett, Revere, Winthrop, and Chelsea. But to her, that was all one place. It was Greater Boston. And she said, you know what? When people decide to come to our hotels, they're not online in Iowa or in Israel saying, I want to go to Chelsea. What they're online doing is, I want to get a hotel room close to Boston that meets my budget, and they're finding their way in Chelsea. So the reason why I tell you this story in terms of zoning is that after her 5th hotel, I asked her, I was feeling embarrassed. I had embarrassment of riches. Mayors from around Chelsea, mayors and managers were saying, Jay, can you help us get hotels to come to our community? And so I felt generous enough that I started asking my friend Chris, the developer, would you consider going to a neighboring community? I won't tell you the name of the community. Would you consider going to a neighboring community? And she said, Jay, it's a funny thing. When we were doing hotel number 2, we would have considered going to that neighboring community. But when we looked at the zoning process to get a building permitted and compared it to your zoning process to get something permitted, we decided it wasn't worth the brain damage it was going to take to get a hotel permitted over there. And now that we have made the major investment in Chelsea of these 5 hotels, there are no flags left. There are no named brands left to go over to the neighboring community to be relocated. And so, an important story about the fundamentals of things that you can do in life, not only in development. The sooner that you're able to take advantage of situations, the better the relationships you develop with people, and the more generous you are about understanding what others' needs are, as opposed to having a black and white view of the world, the better off you are in getting things developed. So there's so many good things happening today about cities and the revitalization of cities. So when I was out in Holyoke today, I saw all these buildings, and I saw the loss of wealth, and felt really bad about the condition of the buildings. But what I also saw was a spirit, an entrepreneurial and innovative spirit that suggests to me that even the Holyokes of the world are going to be successful. It may take them some time, but they're going to be successful. There's a move, as we all know, there's a move back to cities. So the love affair that many Americans have had with the suburbs is over, and now people are moving back to cities in the droves. I was with the proposed redeveloper of the Copley Place. I think it's Copley Place, is proposing to build 300 plus units of housing, including something like 180 to 200 condos that are going to go for something like $2 million a year. So in the Bostons of the world, you see that wealth is coming back in and is willing to pay to be in places like the new Copley Place that's being built. But you go out to Pittsfield, you go out to Holyoke, you go out to Fitchburg, and you see that there's a different type of activity happening. There's a different type of buyer, a different type of renter who's coming back to the city. And those are people who are innovators. Those are people who are entrepreneurs. Those are people who are connected to the places of higher education that anchor those communities. Those are people who value the urban experience, the amenities that are offered in cities, the ability to socialize with people and be able to walk to stores and not need a car and all that other stuff. So I'm really optimistic about what's happening in cities. The arts continue to be the basis for so much of the revitalization of older communities. I'm just shocked at the number of artists there are in this world, but there are so many of them that every place in Massachusetts has a chance to attract artists and the good work that they do. The big thing that I see about cities is that there's an ecosystem in a city that supports the type of living that a suburban location can't. You know, you have the combination of culture and shopping and work and open space and housing and religion and institutions and healthcare, you know, and it goes on and on and on. So the ecosystem supports what I believe is the best days ahead for cities. You know, in Holyoke, even in those buildings that I was tempted to say, why aren't you tearing them down? You see what you say in the real estate development world, great bones in these buildings. You know, you just don't build buildings like that anymore, right? The character in the buildings, if you can just get somebody, if you can marshal some resources to renovate those buildings, you can create really cool, hip places to live that can serve as anchors of neighborhoods and beyond. So the thing that, the reason why I'm most optimistic about cities and towns is that notwithstanding my concerns about impediments for some cities and overcoming their issues with zoning and lack of talent to attract development, there are great partnerships, and I hear more mayors and managers who are ready to give up on the old ways of doing things and instead looking to the private sector, looking to innovators in their own community, looking to other levels of government, like state government, and creating partnerships that are reinvesting in communities. So how am I doing for time, Barry? I have all the time I want? That's not true. Okay, I'm going to take about another 10 minutes. So let me fast forward to what I'm doing now. I have to say that for the last 14 years, I had the greatest job in the world. Being given the opportunity to be in charge of the community that I grew up in was a great opportunity. I was fond of saying that, having grown up in Chelsea and having been involved in politics since I was like age 10, not only did I know where all the bodies were buried, but I was responsible for burying some of them myself. And so being given the opportunity to transform the community was really important. The day that I decided that I wanted to do that was the first day I went off to college. So I was the first in my family to go off to college, and was off to Clark. And when I got to Clark, I hooked up with some other freshmen, and those freshmen were from Revere and Malden and Everett, and the Chelsea jokes just started and started and started and didn't stop. And that very day, I said to myself, I remember exactly where I was on the campus in Worcester, and I said to myself, I want to go back and change the way that people think about my hometown. So having given the opportunity to do so, was fabulous, and we had some success in doing so, and partners, including my good friend Barry, helped along the way to make sure that we were on the right track and held us accountable when we needed to be held accountable, but really gave us the encouragement when we needed that too. So 14 years, city manager, greatest job in the world, in a community that I love. Why would I leave? And the issue for me was that I wish I had $1 for every time I said I wish I grew up in Boston and not Chelsea. And the reason for that is Chelsea's 1.8 square miles. 1.8 square miles. It's smaller than some of the neighborhoods of Boston. And so looking at Bellingham Square over and over again for 50 years of my life, thinking about the parcel on the corner of, I don't know, Picker Street, Arlington and 5th Street, for 50 years, I was growing tired of it. I still feel like I had a good run in me about things that could happen in Chelsea, but I was feeling like I was getting tired. And the second thing that was a more important thing, there was a guy who was running for office, who I really believed in, and when he called, I was interested in serving. So Charlie Baker and I were acquaintances for 20 some odd years. Charlie was the overseer of the receiver of Chelsea. So Chelsea went into receivership in 1991, the ultimate indignation. I'm sorry if I didn't say that right. Thank you. I always have trouble with that one. I have to come up with another word. Indignation. Did I get it right? Indignity. Indignation, though. The ultimate indignation. So Chelsea was the first community since the Great Depression to go into receivership. And for a guy who was proud of Chelsea and bled red and black, the high school colors, suffering the national notoriety that we had had was really tough. Well, Charlie oversaw the receiver who started to rebuild the community. So I got to know Charlie a little bit then, and we stayed. We would say hello to each other. The tall guys would always, we get a special sign to each other as we go by each other. And this last time when he was running, I got a chance to be in a room with him, and I just gave him a couple of ideas, and he said, geez, I'd love to talk to you about some more things. And so we got together, and the thing that impressed me about then candidate Charlie Baker was, man, he was a smart guy, but he was asking me all kinds of questions, and he was really listening to what I had to say. And then when I heard him actually regurgitate some of the things that I was saying, I said, boy, this is a guy that would be a great partner. And if I was ever going to leave Chelsea and stop being my own CEO, he might be a guy that I'd be interested in working for. So I talked to him a little bit more, and we developed a mutual admiration. So sure enough, he gets elected, and he asks me to come on board, and I said yes. And then it got out early. It wasn't supposed to be out as early as it did. I was outed right away as being his first appointment, and it actually worked out really well. So I've been Secretary of Economic Development, Housing and Economic Development for the last 8 weeks, and candidate Baker, the acquaintance Baker who became candidate Baker, who became more of a friend Baker, and is now Governor Baker, is the same guy that I've known. So this is our cabinet meeting. We come in every Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. I can't believe that the governor is making me show up at 2 o'clock for serious business on a Friday. And we give a PowerPoint presentation of something we want to talk about. And Governor Baker sits with the PowerPoint presentation, and he starts writing notes on the PowerPoint, never looking up at the person who's making a presentation, writing notes. And 5 minutes will go on, 10 minutes will go on, maybe even 15 minutes will go on, and then all of a sudden, it's Charlie time. And he takes over the presentation, he takes over the conversation, and the questions he asks are so probing, and the debate that he encourages is so great that it's exactly what I was looking for as a professional, somebody who's interested in public policy, an ability to affect public policy in the way that he's given me the opportunity to be engaged, to have meaningful discussion, and have some influence over how he's thinking. And I've seen in at least 2 cabinet meetings him changing his mind on ways to proceed. So what the governor has said time and again is that people of policy, and that he wants to hire secretaries who are subject matter experts in their area, and then he wants them to go off and do good things. And so when he grabbed me, he said, you know, Jay, you and I could sit down and we could write the state's economic development agenda, and we could walk out with these tablets and show the world that we have the economic development agenda, or we could engage the public in a discussion about what the economic development agenda could be. And I'm a collaborator. He's a collaborator. We've decided to follow that path. So we have an emerging economic development agenda. I'm going to talk about it quickly, and then I'm going to stop talking. So the first agenda is something that I've kind of been alluding to here. You need to prepare communities for success, right? My Bob Kraft experience versus my FBI experience. If communities are not prepared for the time that somebody is looking at them, they're not going to be successful. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about how we can enhance the abilities of people on the local level to deal with the issues they have, how we can help them assemble properties, how we can deal with permitting, how we can introduce them to businesses and the like. So item number one on our emerging list is preparing for communities. I have two major surprises in 8 weeks of being the Secretary of Economic Development. Here's the first one. I have been talking to business community about what they need in order to grow. So business community, trade associations, what can the state do for you to help you to grow? Who wants to take a stab at what the number one answer is?
Vocational education.
Infrastructure.
Vocational infrastructure, I'm sorry? All right, so thank you for saying tax rates. Who said tax rates? Thank you for saying that. Because that's what I was expecting. And you know what? Not one of them said tax rates. So to get to your vocational, every single one of them said talent. I heard infrastructure, that was a good one. We talk about that down the road. Number one, first and foremost, every single one of them, including today in Holyoke, in a place that is having difficulties getting going, it was about talent. And then there would be a discussion about taxes and regulations. So the concern about talent is that they're concerned about not being able to hire enough quality talent to fill the jobs today, but more so, they're concerned about what's happening tomorrow. Barry's done a lot of work on this. There's one study out there that suggests that in the next, I think, 6 years, there's 100,000 engineers who are going to be retiring across the state. I'm sorry, 100,000 manufacturing workers, 100,000 manufacturing workers. Did you contribute to that study?
That's my stuff.
Will you be retiring by then? I hope not. I hope not. I hope not. Detroit's loss has been Boston's gain for a long time. So, I mean, think about that, 100,000 manufacturing workers, and we're trying to become a manufacturing center once again. So talent is the number one thing, and so that's part of what we're doing. The governor has appointed a sub-cabinet of the Secretary of Labor and Industries, the Secretary of Education, and myself, and all of us are talking about vocational education. And when I was out in Holyoke today, we were talking about vocational education. And we were talking about great schools that didn't have the money to update their equipment. We were talking about schools that were just so-so, that didn't have enough money to bring in the talented teachers or to partner with businesses around curriculum. So number two is talent, talent, talent. Number three is that business taxes and regulation. So we're looking at regulatory reform and competitiveness. So I've been in government all my life, with 6 months of being in the private sector. I've been in government all my life. We used to joke at the State House when I worked there that we're the government, we're here to help. Well, sometimes the government doesn't help as much as we could, and sometimes we sit around and think about how else can we regulate an industry? What can we fix that isn't broken? And we've done too much of that over the years, and it just accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. So we're going through a regulatory review right now, and are going to try to figure out how to maintain the goals that we have for the Commonwealth while reducing the regulatory burden that exists on businesses. And competitiveness is an important thing. So we're not trying to be the cheapest place to work, to own a business. What we're trying to be is competitive. And you want a cheap meal, you go to a place that nobody really wants to eat. You want to pay a fair price for fair service, and that's what we're trying to get to. So number three on our agenda is competitiveness. I'm going to save my other surprise for the end. The fourth thing is about sectors. So we have high growth sectors, Governor's fond of saying, figure out what's working and make it work even more. And so high growth sectors are places we need to be, life sciences, technology. There's emerging sectors. There's cybersecurity, a lot of work done on this very campus about cybersecurity, robotics, things of that nature. So we need to focus on emerging sectors. And then the mature sectors, advanced manufacturing is code for manufacturing in general, how we help them, how we build on tourism and the like. So that's the fourth area that we're working on. The fifth area is my second biggest surprise. So I'm at Northeastern. I know the great work that Northeastern does in educating students. I go to MIT last week, and I know the great work that MIT does. I'm with the Chancellor of UMass Amherst, UMass Boston. I'm in Worcester, and my alma mater is meeting with WPI to do things in Worcester. I know how important higher ed is to the education of our population. What I didn't realize was how important higher ed is to the economy of the Commonwealth. So after I left MIT 2 Fridays ago, I tweeted, thank God Massachusetts has MIT worrying about the economy. And so the fifth emerging principle that we have is that we need to figure out ways of making higher ed, empowering them to do even more for the economy. And those 5 areas are the emerging principles that we have for a development strategy that we believe can bring economic vitality to the Commonwealth, and I'm having a great time doing that. So I could go on literally forever, but I'm going to stop here, and we're going to... The one thing that I hear from employers over and over again is that employers do not feel that they have been engaged in the process of training. And so there's a concept out there called employer-based training, which is different than the traditional way that we've been training. Traditionally, what happens is that we create a training program, we bring you in to train, we give you a certificate, and then we say good luck, and you go off and you try to find a job. Sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. Employer-based training is more a I won't say guarantee, but there's more certainty as to what may happen because the skills that you are developing are based upon what an employer sees as a need in his industry and is applicable in many areas. And it engages the employer, so at the end of the day, the employer is more likely to bring you into the fold. So we're looking at things like in employer-based training. Barry, you good? You want to jump in on that one too?
I can.
Go ahead.
One of the things we're looking at now at the Dukakis Center is we're doing a whole series of studies on vocational education. In fact, we met today with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the authority which provides grants to schools throughout the state, including vocational schools. And the question that they've been asking is our vocational schools, we have 26 regional vocational schools and another kind of 40 comprehensive schools with vocational programs in them. Are they training young people for the jobs of yesterday, today, or tomorrow? And so we've just completing a mammoth study, which is being led by myself and Alan Clayton Matthews on our staff, who is also on the Council of Economic Advisors of the former governor, where we are estimating the very detailed occupational needs in the Commonwealth, not just new jobs, but replacements for all of us who are going to be retiring. And we've done that for 675 occupations. And we've done it for different regions of the state. One of the things that was most fascinating, please don't say this to anybody because it's going to be the headline in the Globe when this report comes out, but we were staggered, particularly somebody who's been in a university for 44 years as of this year, that about 2/3 of the job openings over the next 10 years will more or less require no more education than a community college education. We've been saying everybody's got to get 4 years of education. It is true that many of those jobs don't pay very well. We've got to improve jobs for those who are high school dropouts or just graduated from high school. But when you look at the kinds of jobs that are being developed, many of them are ones where you get your skill training in vocational schools. And we pay very little attention to those vocational schools. We have to pay more attention to it. I know that Secretary Pizer, the Secretary of Education, and Secretary of Labor and your Secretary are going to be getting together thinking a lot about this whole question of workforce training, development, having the vocational schools work with employers. I think you know Mike Tomasi from AccuRounds. Mike, I think I may have mentioned in class, he's one of our wonderful manufacturers down in Avon, AccuRounds, and he's taken to working with the vocational schools and their middle schools, and he's opening up his plant on weekends for tours. And I asked him how the tours go. You know about these tours? And so I said, well, Mike, tell me about the tour. He says, well, we start in the employee parking lot. I said, the employee parking lot? Why do you do that? He says, because I want these young kids to know that our employees, not managers, our employees are driving BMWs, they're driving Jaguars, they're driving, Lexuses. And then we take them in the plant. And of course, every one of his workers are working on sophisticated computerized equipment in air-conditioned, clean space. Very different than, when I spent 3 summers working on a Ford plant when it would get up to 120 degrees in the summer, helping to build carburetors and alternators for the 1964 Mustang. We got to change the vision that people have about what manufacturing is all about. So there's going to be a lot of work done on vocational education, and we're happy to hear that the governor and his secretariats are going to be working with us on that, or will be working with them on that. Question? Right over here.
Hi, you mentioned
No. Who are you?
Margaret Wheeler, retired land conservation attorney. You mentioned blight or curing of blight or addressing blight as being one of the things that you need to do by way of readiness in a community. And thinking of Boston's sort of sad history of the West End, how do you define blight and avoid the kinds of mistakes that have been made in the past in urban renewal?
So the question is, how do you avoid blight? In the West End, many people thought it was blighted, and other people thought that it was a place that should be cherished. So the definition of blight is in the eye of the beholder, right? So in terms of urban renewal, there's a definition that some bureaucrat somewhere would affirm or deny as being blight, but I don't think there's a hard and fast definition of what blight is. I think the best way to assure what you're talking about is transparency, and I think that there's more transparency in the process of doing just about everything these days, and so there's healthy dialogue. Going back to what's happening in Roxbury, there are more people engaged than ever before, or I shouldn't say ever before, but in recent memory, and what we've done. Boy, this is going way off. The internet has empowered so many people to become so knowledgeable about so many things. And so I would like to think that some of the mistakes we've made in the past are going to be avoided because people like you who take time to learn about issues and then show up and articulate a position about something, help to bring to the process a different perspective and a voice that back in the West End days was absent.
I would also add that, in a lot of our communities, we do have blight, like in Holyoke. We had tons of blight in Lawrence, Lowell. And what we've done is we've had some very good developers who come in, sometimes using historical tax credits, and have redeveloped those communities rather than bulldoze them, as we did in the West End. Because we have some magnificent older buildings, as you've been seeing in all the communities you're going to, Fitchburg, Holyoke, Lawrence, Lowell. And now we're seeing some beautiful developments, and it's really made a difference in Lawrence's comeback because they've been able to take those old buildings, lease them out at reasonable rates, and they're getting all these young entrepreneurs coming in and setting up small businesses where you used to have a mammoth textile mill.
Gary Sharpless, former entrepreneur. This is going to be a tough question because.
Aren't you always an entrepreneur? Once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We talk about. You talked about Chelsea in the last 14 years, and you've done some great stuff. In 1.8 square miles, took 14 years. You look at the data that Barry presented is overwhelming in terms of the number of cities that could take advantage of what you've done. How long do you think it's going to take, and do you think it can be done simultaneously? Each city doing it, and do you think the Commonwealth can support that?
So I'll answer the question in a little bit different way. If I had a magic wand and I could tap on every city and town something with a magic wand, what would it be? And the answer would be leadership. And so what happened in Chelsea was we went to that bottom, the nadir, we hit receivership, and as a result of receivership, the city fathers came together and said, we want to get rid of the mayoral form of government, and instead put in its place a city manager form of government. The last 5 mayors that served in Chelsea also served the state 2 to 4 years with time off for good behavior, right? So the last mayor of Chelsea was a bartender prior to becoming mayor, and my father-in-law was a bartender, the smartest guy I knew, so there were bartenders that are really smart people. He was a bartender in what would have been Chelsea's combat zone. And so he was miscast in one of 2 positions and happened to be in office when Chelsea went into receivership, so you can guess which one it is. So the answer to your question is that I think all cities and towns share the good bones, share the developers who are local, who are loyal and local, share people in the community who want to see good things, share some asset, whether it's a location or ample water supply or labor or something or other. The difference that I see as I go across is the leadership thing. And there are some communities that get it, and then there are other communities that the leadership is incapable of leading and is incapable of rising above what gets one elected in order to accomplish what gets done. So in Chelsea's case, we went to a mayoral form of went from a mayoral form of government to a city manager form of government, and in addition to that, we created a position that was the planning and development director, is also the zoning board chairman. So you think about the power of that. Daily, I'm attracting businesses, but nightly I'm not fighting with the zoning board to get those businesses permitted. I was able to then be the permitting authority. So I would say the benevolent dictator has worked well in Chelsea, but that's because the benevolent dictator has worked well. It's possible benevolent dictator doesn't. I hope transparency makes a difference there. But if I could wave a magic wand, it would be leadership, and I would argue that those cities and towns, like I'll give you an example, Salem, taking off, great leadership. I didn't mention that she was my deputy city manager in Chelsea. But Somerville, taken off, great leadership. Joe Curtatone, great mayor. What I saw well, you've mentioned Lawrence. I mean, Lawrence has been liberated, and Dan Rivera, God bless him, has so many expectations on his shoulders, and yet he's living up to every one of them. Great leadership.
And you met Lisa Wong.
Lisa Wong in Fitchburg, great leadership. And then you look at places that, seemingly aren't getting it, and you can kind of point to the, local leadership.
The reason why we created that economic development self-assessment tool was not so I could do research at the Boston Fed. Mm-hmm. It was to help people understand, municipal leaders understand what they had to do to be as successful as Jay has been. And I've been very proud of that work. One of our best examples, and I don't think you know about this, is we've done a lot of work in Lynn with Judy Kennedy. And Judy brought us in along with the Lynn Chamber of Commerce. And that's when we opened the process up and had 30, 40, 50 people in the room. And it was really terrific. When we came back, we gave our report, and we said, here are some of the problems you have. And Mayor Kennedy and the president of the city council, who challenged her in the last election and lost, asked me, would I be willing to come and give a special presentation before the city council? And I went and I gave that presentation. And one of the things we talked about was the sorry state of timeliness of approval in Lynn. And before that session was over, they passed 343Ds, the first in their history. This is zoning reform. That's the kind of thing we need to do. And I also think, with my good friend here, this is where the universities you talked about and this state government and state legislature can work together on things like economic development, all kinds of new housing ideas that you and I are going to talk about. And I think this is a wonderful administration we now have in the state to work very closely with many of us, or we can work very closely with you to build that leadership in one community after another after another.
Hi there. My name is Ryan Olson. I'm a student here at Northeastern. And I have a question about the workforce skills subcabinet. A lot of times we're talking about vocational education, higher education. I was wondering if you guys were planning to do anything to address the most fundamental skill gap, and that's like the 1 in 10 adults in Massachusetts who don't have a high school degree or equivalent, and what your thoughts were around that, and English as a second language as well.
So the good thing to being 8 weeks into office and having only 2 workforce cabinet meetings is I can tell you that everything is on the board now. And Barry informed me of all kinds of great work he's doing. Right now, this is where we are in the phase, and this gets back to the governor's philosophy. Go out and talk to smart people. We're talking to people about what their issues are, and Barry's just informed me of all the great work he's doing. I've heard from others that have things to share as well. So we're in the phase of just collecting information now, and then we'll put together what our agenda will be. Thanks for raising that. That's a good one.
Hi, Dave Kalopek from Waltham. We're a home of Brandeis University.
We've heard of it.
You've heard of Brandeis? And we have another good university there. We used to have several hospitals. We used to have Waltham City Hospital. We used to have the Fernal Center. We had Metropolitan State. We had Middlesex County Hospital. And I also do real estate. I've done turnarounds and startups. Where are you going to house? Part of your title is housing. And what I see is and I work all around the state. I've been active with the Mass Association of Realtors, Greater Boston, work throughout the area. Where are we going to shelter people? How are we going to shelter them affordably? We took 2 schools in Waltham and converted them to senior housing. The minimum rent is $1,100 a month plus utilities. There are 7 people living in a 19-unit conversion. People can't afford it. So part of the job I see is going forward is some strategy. There's land around. There are parcels around. But somebody has to step up to the bat and do something about that affordable housing because we don't have it for older people. We don't have it for younger people. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, the major issue for us, a major challenge going forward is housing availability. And depending upon which index you look at, some people give us a demerit for that and say that Massachusetts is not a great state to do business because of the cost and the scarcity of housing. And others will say that we'll offset that because wage rates are higher than other places and so people can afford it. The latter is not a good answer for us. We're thinking about it. I don't have a policy to give you right now. I'll give you my perspective. I'm a big supply and demand guy, and to me, the generation of housing, whether it's affordable or market rate, has a positive effect on the cost of housing overall. And so I'm a believer in generating as much housing as you can, and when you do that, rents will adjust or sale prices will adjust accordingly. Barry talked about in the introduction, in Chelsea we did 2,000 units, which may not sound like a lot when you think about Boston scale, but Chelsea had 12,000 units to start. So, we added 15% to our housing stock. I mean, that's an amazing number. And it was all over the place. The mayor is talking about middle income housing. We're talking about various ways of encouraging housing. The next initiative that you'll see come out is we're doing a survey right now of all state-owned properties to determine what we can let out for housing. And we're interested in working with communities that are interested in looking at new housing types. So I'm fascinated with micro units. What my experience is, and be interested with a nod of the head if you agree with it as well. The day and age where young people want to live together and not have a relationship is over. What I hear from young people all the time is I'd rather spend another $100 a month, or I'd rather have 100 square feet less in order not to have a crazy roommate. And so building 600, 700, maybe as high as 800, maybe as low as 300 or 400 square feet units are a way of getting production done and done quickly. We're experimenting with it in Chelsea. We did a 9-unit building that's about to come online that averages 350 square feet. Now, I'm a big guy, and one size doesn't fit all, right? I learned that a long time ago. But I have to tell you, I went into a 350 square foot unit, and it felt, maybe so because I was only there for an hour, but it felt like it could work. Compared to some of the places I used to be. So there's no easy answer. I think what we need to do is we need to be innovative. We need to be open. The one other thing I'll say about housing, I'm kind of doing a brain dump on housing. This is the irony I find about housing. For the last 10 years in Chelsea, I have been opining that I've been asking every developer who comes through my door, would you build a 20-story building? Now, what community, would ask developers to go higher than they wanted to. I thought I was going to get a flood of people who wanted to come in. Build me, go vertical, build it. I could do 5 stories, wood over a podium, right, all day and all night. I want a tower. The problem with the tower is, once you bring steel into the equation, the prices go out of control, and the money that you can get from rent or sale doesn't justify the extra expense. With that knowledge, I'm trying to now figure out, working with Mass Development and Mass Housing Finance Agency, how do we address that delta between what the additional cost is versus what the benefit is, and that will have a dramatic impact. You look up and down 128, you go from Chelsea up to Route 1, all the way up Route 1 to Peabody and Danvers, and you see the same type of housing being built, 5-story, and so we have to figure out how to do that better. Yeah, thank you.
As I think you heard last week or the week before, last week, we've been developing this idea that I will share with you called millennial villages,
Okay.
particularly aimed at graduate students, young professionals, the millennial generation. Yeah. And we're going to be releasing our report with the Boston Foundation on March 18th. You've been invited, I think.
But I've declined.
Oh, you've declined.
Yeah, I can't make March 18th, but I look forward to the.
But we are going to be releasing this report calling for 8,000 to 10,000 units with some very, very interesting pieces to it. So I'll share that with you at some point.
Great.
Hi, I'm Diane Valley. I sell real estate, and I'm also a passionate urban horticulturist. And I've noticed in the development that has been taking place recently in the city of Fenway, Seaport, even parts of South Boston, and especially the North Station area, they're built with no trees, no green space whatsoever. And I was wondering if you have a strategy to develop some green space. We have a great city because we're trying to be world class. Yeah. And if you look at the great European cities, they all have beautiful green space. And it's not something that you can really measure to how do you build a city with a soul.
Yeah, that's a good point, good observation. I'll take a closer look at that. The Copley project I was talking about is upgrading the open space that's out there now. I was really impressed with that. First of all, back to Chelsea. One of the things I'm most proud of in Chelsea is that during my tenure, we created 10 new parks in the city. Some of them were really small. Some of them were as small as 5,000 square feet, and yet that 5,000 square foot park that was encapsulated with a fence for 20 years, and I walked by it and nobody was in there. The day we opened it, there were 100 kids in the park. It's just it's one of the best things that I did in Chelsea. So the state is encouraging communities that aren't named Boston and Cambridge through park grant programs, and Secretary Matt Beaton, who's the Environmental Affairs Secretary, is going to continue that work that enables many communities to build parks. In terms of Boston and what's happening with the development, that's, not that I want to push that one off, but that's a BRA question and probably a D&D question as to how they're going to provide for parks. I would agree with you in general that great cities have more than just hardscape, and we need to figure out how to do that.
I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, Secretary Ash. My name is Lauren Costello. I'm a student at Northeastern University in the Urban and Regional Policy Program, and I also work with Barry at the Dukakis Center. My background is in economic development in my relatively short career so far. My passion is in economic development, particularly in working cities, and I have a real appreciation, as I'm sure you do too, for sort of the hands-on approach that cities and towns take in their economic development planning and policy. But that's not without, direct collaboration with the state and regional agencies. So my question is for you personally, as you're transitioning into your new role as secretary, what challenges and opportunities exist when you bridge city and state economic development policy? And in your success from Chelsea, what are the sort of tools and best practices that you're hoping to carry up to the state level in your new role?
Yeah, take that backwards. I actually started my first discussion with my new staff talking about the economic development agenda we had for Chelsea and how we needed to try to figure out if we could scale it. So I think the best practice on the local level is to, we did a lot of slogans. One of the slogans we had was plan your work and then work your plan. And what you'll find as you go out and have a career is that there are many communities, there are many entities that spend an awful lot of money on plans, and then nobody ever takes out the plan and does anything with it. The second thing in terms of the form of government that we had, which gets back to leadership, was that, at 14 years, Chelsea's been around since 1624. At 14 years, I was the longest serving CEO in the city's history. So if you have a good plan and you have 14 years to implement it, good things can happen, and that's what's happening. So there is something about planning your work, working your plan, and then having some consistency around it. In terms of how the state can help cities, Governor Baker identified this. I didn't realize it, but Governor Baker is fond of telling anyone who wants to listen that I'm the first Secretary of Housing and Economic Development that has a municipal background. And one of the very reasons, in addition to I'm the only guy that he looks up to on the cabinet, figuratively. The reason why he did that is that he's a believer in the power of cities and towns to do things. So this whole idea about empowering cities and towns for success is what we're going to work on. And I think the number one thing I'd like to accomplish, it's going to be an expensive initiative, and it's going to take patience, but helping cities and towns to acquire clean and permit parcels that are ready for development, I think is a huge benefit to those cities and towns. And most of the cities and towns that need that help are the cities and towns that can't afford to do it on their own. So that'll be one of many initiatives that we undertake.
One last question.
Hi, my name is Jack Levitt. I'm not a frequent attendee, but I'm a first-year student at Northeastern.
Could you pass that to somebody who does frequent? No, I'm only kidding, Jack. Go ahead.
And I'm also an intern, actually, in the Baker administration.
Keep the microphone then.
My question is, I know during the campaign, candidate Baker talked a lot about, in terms of higher ed, about bringing co-op to some of the state schools and also creating a 3-year program to help graduates get in the workforce better. And I was wondering, are those still ideas that are going to be implemented within the next 4 years? And are people in the administration still talking about these methods?
Yeah, Secretary Pizer is working on the 3-year concept. So the idea is helping students get through their undergraduate degrees in 3 years instead of 4. And that's a way of cost containment, what we need to do to help that out. And in terms of internships, we've had substantial discussion. Again, we've only had two meetings, but we've had substantial discussion on, frankly, the Northeastern model and the benefit of the Northeastern model, which is to give people an opportunity to get into the workplace and learn in the workplace and decide what they want to do. So yes, the answer to the question is that both of those, as well as all the other campaign pledges, each of the secretaries have, and we look at regularly and are trying to incorporate those pledges into our working documents.
Well, I want to thank our guest, my friend, Secretary Jay Ash, for a fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. Next week, we have spring break, so we don't have anything next week. The following week, we're going to switch from urban development, housing, and the other issues we've talked, to arts and culture. We have Julie Burrows, who is the new Chief of for Arts for Mayor Walsh, and we have my dear friend Colette Phillips, who runs Get Connected Arts, to be discussing the role of arts and culture in our communities. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. By then, half the snow will be gone, the sun will be out. We'll be on, we'll have later afternoons. Come, bring your friends, and we'll see you then. Take care. Thank you. I do. We'll get together soon. The architecture department here, we're working on the report, and they wanted